Hey everybody, welcome back to Race of History. Today we're going to get into the Sabaton history for the Caroleans prayer, soldiers of the Swedish kings. Let's get into it.
I'm Indy Nidell.
And I'm Joachim from Sabaton, and this is Sabaton History.
The soldiers of the Swedish kings, the Caroleans, were the elite soldiers of Europe in their day, winning great battles, even outnumbered with their innovative and superior tactics.
But their discipline, morale, and religious convictions were equally important. And that's what our song Carolean's Prayer is about. Now,
Joachim is going to tell you a little bit about the song in a minute, but first, I'm going to tell you the history.
So, I had a bunch of people comment in the video for the Caroleans prayer, the actual song, all sorts of stuff about this. I had people comment about tactics, about the influence of religious beliefs, about all sorts of stuff, which was awesome. This is not an area of history where I am like super knowledgeable about the military style and tactics of the Swedish army of this time period, right? Like it's just not it's not really up my alley. So it's very interesting to me. All of this stuff is super interesting to me. But this has been particularly fun in that I'm kind of going into it blind with a lot of this stuff, because although for the time period I know like the general history, I talked about this in the comments before, even the general history I know more from the direction of the Holy Roman Empire and, you know, the church schism and that. And so it's just all of this is very interesting and enlightening, and it's stuff that I did not know. And I appreciate all of the comments from everybody trying to give me more insight, explain to me kind of the thought process, the morale, the everything about it, because I love learning about this stuff, and this is all stuff that I don't know going into it.
In the 17th century, most European armies consisted of three types of soldiers: the levies, who were usually conscripted or otherwise locally raised men; the mercenaries, who were often experienced but expensive soldiers for hire; and guards units, who were the elite household units of the state, high in talent, small in numbers. The Swedish Carolean soldiers were something in between. After the rather disappointing performance of the Swedish military in the Scanian War, which ended in 1679, in which they fought against Danish, Norwegian, and German armies, who they had thought to be...
Real quick, those ships from that time period are so awesome looking to me. I don't know if there's something about them that I just really, really love. Those old school broadside cannon ships.
Their inferior, King Carl XI began reorganizing and modernizing the Swedish army in the 1680s. He developed a new allotment system where each Swedish province had to raise and equip a standing force of around 1,000 men in both war and peace times. Those men were professional soldiers who, in return for being given their uniforms, weapons, and plots of land to support their families, had a lifelong commitment to king and country until they were released from service, or they died, whichever came first. Sweden, or the Swedish Empire, or just the Kingdom of Sweden, had never been able to maintain a standing army for long because of a lack of manpower and resources. Even at the height of its power, Sweden could not compete with other more populous European powers in terms of numbers and replenishment. So instead of quantity, they had to rely on quality. The Caroleans, as they were now called after their king, enjoyed the best training and quality of equipment the empire could provide. This emphasized modern flintlock muskets and strict drills in marching and firing, performed with live ammunition. Special emphasis was put on close combat training with rapiers, bayonets, and pikes. Now, bayonets were actually a rather new thing, so most of the musketeers were trained in fencing with rapiers. Since the Caroleans were now professional soldiers, they began to develop a certain feeling of uniqueness within Swedish society. The community was paying for their living, and in return, they were expected to fight and to die for the crown. But it went beyond that. Officers and veterans defined themselves as krigare, meaning warrior, and associated the word with a sense of pride and duty and merit. It wasn't just about the oath to the king or the regiment, nor the time they spent training, nor even their competence in leadership. The true test of the warrior was his baptism of fire during a real battle. Scars from wounds were shown proudly since they symbolized the blood shed for their king. And at the end of a Carolean's life, the scars they bore were the only proof of the hardships they had endured on the battlefield. And of course, their comrades who were also present at the battles experienced the same pain, fear, glory, anger, and joy. And society would never really understand it in the same way.
Morale and discipline unites them.
That's very interesting. That sounds a lot like, at least here in the States, the soldiers who came back from World War I and World War II, where there was this very specific kind of close-knit, I don't know, bond through fire, maybe, where, I mean, almost any quote you hear from a vet from World War II when they got home talks about how nobody could possibly understand what they had seen, what they had been asked to do, what had happened to their friend or the person next to them. And so this is very interesting that at the time period, the group is small enough that it actually is like even when they're at home, it's like one solid thing. Like the people that make this up are like one solid unit, even amongst the civilian population. That's very, very interesting to me.
A common faith to keep them strong. Always on their way to heaven. In the name of Christ, their enemies chastise.
Now, this feeling was true, more or less, for every soldier everywhere, but the Caroleans dealt with it in a different way. They had a certain camaraderie that was absent in the larger European armies, which was great for morale, but besides the strong camaraderie, they held strongly and even fatalistically to the Christian faith. Chaplains were common in European armies, but for the Caroleans, they were omnipresent. In the way battles were fought at the time, with lines of tightly packed soldiers marching towards and then shooting at each other, it was difficult to explain why one soldier died and the man next to him lived. The strong faith of the Caroleans convinced them that every death on the battlefield was simply according to God's will. Death did not come to them because they failed or made a poor decision or simply because of bad luck, but because death was already predetermined before the battle. God had already decided it, so worrying about whether you would survive a battle was pointless.
Okay, so I talked about this in the comments to the song here, but this sounds very much like old, not Crusader armies necessarily, but like that time period of Christianity. This sounds like that sort of thought process where basically everything was predetermined and you were there simply as like a vessel carrying out what already was determined to happen. That's very, very intriguing to me. How that could get there, right? Because like I understand it in the context of the Crusades, at least in small areas around the Crusades, because those areas were historically from very close to the church, or you know, there was something specific about it. But here specifically, how did they get to this point? Was it always there? Was religion very, very deeply held throughout society, and that just translated to the soldiers? Or did the soldiers have it in a different way because of the battles? Like, I'm very curious how you get the core of the army to basically get to a point of such religious conviction that they're willing to basically do anything. They're willing to do anything. They're willing to be asked to do anything, because it doesn't matter. Living or dying has nothing to do with what I'm actually doing on the battlefield. It's either going to happen or not happen, and it's already been determined. So even if I hunker down in a hole here, if I was determined to have died, I will die in this hole. Somebody will come by and shoot me. And I'm very curious how the core of the army got to a place of this deep of religious conviction.
All this did not make the Caroleans completely fearless or some sort of religious warrior fanatics, but it was a way of dealing with the stress of battle. And this strong Christian belief, in combination with the strict discipline of the drills, made the Caroleans highly motivated soldiers. If you take a look at how the Caroleans actually fought, you understand why a certain fatalism was necessary. As I said before, the Swedish forces had to rely on quality over quantity. This had to really translate on the battlefield itself. Long engagements with high casualties were unacceptable, and Sweden could not fight wars of attrition. Instead, they had to defeat their enemies quickly and decisively. Regular battle combat was fought in line formations, where soldiers closed ranks to maximize the amount of firepower they could unleash on the enemy, so both sides would, as I said, march their infantry towards the other and then stop and open fire at a distance of around 100 meters. They would then reload and continue to fire. Artillery and cavalry were used to disrupt and break these infantry formations and exploit breakthroughs. But that could lead to long and costly engagements, the sort the Swedes were trying to avoid. So they had to beat this whole system. The Carolean musketeers would set up 4 ranks deep as they marched toward the enemy. But instead of halting to fire at the usual 100-meter mark, they continued marching. The enemy, of course, would not and opened fire upon them, but the Caroleans marched on. Muskets were notoriously inaccurate, but many men still fell from enemy fire. Despite the shock and despite the casualties, they marched on until they were around 50 meters away from the enemy. The saying, "Do not fire until you see the whites of their eyes," did not come from this practice, but it might as well have. The volley of gunfire from the first 2 ranks at such close range was far more accurate and far more effective than the enemy's, both physically and psychologically. But after the first 2 ranks had fired, they still did not stop or reload, but kept on marching.
Into battle, facing the fire, Lord, thy will be done.
That is such a bizarre, and I would imagine extremely effective method of open warfare at this time period. You know, my joke on this is the reason that they were marching in lines and they were all so close together, you know, wasn't to maximize gunpowder or firepower. It was because literally a battle would never end if they didn't do that. The muskets were so inaccurate that if you had big, you know, if the big groups split up into individuals or small groups roaming around a battlefield, nobody would ever get shot. I mean, you would have month-long battles where the casualties could be counted on one hand. Certainly the firearm casualties. But this is just such an interesting way to go about it. And now I'm curious of how you come up with that idea. Like, we don't have the manpower. but we have really great trained soldiers. So how do we make this work to our advantage? We get as close to the enemy as we possibly can. Well, doesn't that expose us to more enemy gunfire? Certainly it does. And I mean, no wonder you, like he said, you get that fatalistic mindset or thought process because you're literally just walking into a hail of musket balls. But to just keep walking and keep walking even after you shoot, I don't know. That's just, I know he said that it doesn't go to religious, like religious fanatics on a battlefield, but I feel like it's kind of close to that line. Like, that's pretty ballsy, pretty hairy to just walk right into gunfire and whoever dies, dies. But eventually we're going to be closer, we're going to have the firepower, and we're trained and ready to do this even at, hand-to-hand level. Like, yeesh.
Into battle, walking the line, see the light in their eyes, Caroleans are marching on.
God, I love the chorus.
Instead of reloading, those first two ranks drew their rapiers and changed positions with the third and fourth ranks. Then they closed in on the enemy to around 20 meters, and now those ranks opened fire as well. At this close range, most bullets would easily find their targets and completely disrupt the enemy's ranks, and the Caroleans kept on coming. They did not stop to reload, but charged with cold steel, bayonets and sabers raised, into the enemy. Modern military historians support the thesis that although all armies had begun slowly equipping their soldiers with some sort of bayonet or bayonet-like weapon, actual charges were thought of as a thing of the past by most military thinkers at the time. Thus, the Caroleans, specially trained in close combat, crashed into disrupted, unstable, and frightened formations. The tactic was simply called...
Yeah, the thought process by... And I've read a couple of different books on this, but the thought process is that as soon as guns, as soon as firearms become readily available on the battlefield, the idea of this, and I mean like super readily available, not like, not here and there, but as soon as like basically everybody is equipped with a firearm, the idea of a frontal charge kind of starts to move further back. A lot of historians argue that you see a change in human psyche starting at this point, where essentially the soldier becomes more used to death at further and further intervals away, right? So it goes from everybody fighting hand to hand all the time in ancient warfare all the way up, pre-modern. Then you come through this pre-modern period and you see the shift to gunpowder weapons, and the thought is that although incredibly inaccurate, it's still a lot less. Not every battle is decided, not everybody is fighting hand to hand as it used to be. And as the technology for guns gets better and better, that distance gets further and further and further away that people are killing at. And so the idea is that even the human psyche is having this shift here, where they don't like or are starting to not like the idea of stabbing somebody else or being stabbed. They would be much more comfortable with shooting somebody than with stabbing or being stabbed. So I can see why the idea that you expect, like, you're all going to stand there in rows and shoot at each other and cannons are going to fire, that when a group approaches you with their bayonets and their swords drawn or their rapiers drawn, that, you're like, what in the hell are we doing? This isn't how I wanted to fight the battle.
Gå på, which translates to walk on or march on. All it was swiftly marching through the enemy's fire to close with him. It was a very dangerous tactic and relied decisively and exclusively on personal bravery and aggressiveness. But done correctly, it could absolutely terrify the enemy and lead to a swift victory with minimal casualties.
I'd be freaking out.
When you think about it, it arguably made the Caroleans the first modern shock troops. Breakthroughs would then be exploited by Carolean
Holy shit! That is totally true. That is totally true. That might be the first modern shock troops. Wow, sorry, that just totally blew my mind when he said that.
Cavalry, who, in the same spirit as the infantry, rode very close, often knee to knee, to maximize their effect on smashing the enemy's formations. In many ways, the Caroleans were unique, and actually pulling off said gore-poor tactic was only possible through the strict discipline, the high morale, and the unique motivation of the Swedish soldiers at the time. The Great Northern War of 1700 to 1721 showcased the effectiveness of such tactics in battle after battle against numerically superior foes. But we'll talk more about this in the other episodes about the other songs from Sabaton's Carolus Rex album, a concept album about this period in Swedish history. Suffice it to say for now, that as long as the Swedish army could avoid mistakes on an operational level, it was extremely tough to beat on a tactical level, and doing so would, in any case, require a huge loss of life from those foolish enough to try.
This has made me super excited and anxious to get into the Great Northern War series and the Deluge series, both.
Now, the actual writing process for this song was a bit different from how you write most of the other Sabaton songs, yeah?
Yes, normally we do the music first and the lyrics comes later, since there's a lot of research to do for us usually.
Fair enough.
In this case, however, already as I was writing the song, the words "Tills han vitögat ser, Carolinen marscherar fram," which is basically almost what we sing in the lyrics. And it's, see the white in their eyes, Caroleans are marching on.
But I like that you said it in Swedish, because this song you can get in Swedish and in English.
Yes.
You have it in both. Now, why did you do that?
Well, we've had requests over the years that we should maybe do something in Swedish at some point, and we thought, yeah, but it didn't make sense for us to sing in Swedish if it wasn't about Swedish
About
history.
World War II.
Yeah. You know, Swedish people are decent at English at least, and no matter how good we think we are, it's still a second language. Writing the lyrics for this album was so much easier in Swedish. And also singing. You know, when you're singing, it's not only about hitting the notes, but also getting the vibe and the feel in there.
A lot of people miss that.
Yeah, and it's bizarre that I needed less than half of the retakes that I normally do when I was singing in Swedish.
But now this song, it has the choir, right?
Yes.
Okay.
And it's one of my favorite moments, actually, of recording ever. I don't know, for those of you who record music, sometimes things just turn out as good or better than you could even dare to hope. And this was one of those moments. And I'm standing there listening to the choirs being made as I'm singing "Tills han vitögat ser, Carolinen marscherar fram." La sitt liv i Guds hand för sin konung och fosterland. Put their lives in God's hand for the kingdom and fatherland. And when I hear those...
I actually picked that up. I'm telling you, it's so close to German, I feel like. It's so close, like there are words like that I can pick up just because of how much it sounds like German. Which is kind of weird because I don't really speak German. But from all of the World War II and World War I research, you come across a lot of German. I mean, a lot of German. I feel like the languages are just so similar. They just sound like, you know, old German dialect. I thought one of the coolest parts of this, and I talked about it in the video for the song, was the organs and the choir. That seemed like a very cool way to show the background of religion and then have the background of the song also have like sound religious. Like, I don't know. I just felt like that was a super clever way to connect those dots.
Those words in Swedish with the choir, and I'm singing it at the same time. I had to stop the takes because I was almost shaking, you know, and I got goosebumps already thinking about it, you know.
How many layers of chorus and choir were there?
Well, it's triple harmony. Usually we record male choirs, so it's like 3 to 5 guys who go in and sing the bottom harmony, the middle, and the top harmony. And the top harmony is usually where I'm singing as well, or joining in. And then we do the same for female choirs. So it's quite a lot of takes because we usually dub them as well. So we get them in stereo, so we go left and right.
Well, that's cool. And let's hear some of that.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Well, that was fascinating. Thank you very much, Joachim. Carolean's Prayer is on Carolus Rex.
And that's it for today.
But we will see you next time right here on Sabaton History.
All right, everyone, that's it for today. Remember to subscribe to Sabaton History, the regular Sabaton channel, but also remember to check out Time Ghost and World War II. If you want to see more videos like this, here's a playlist. Cool stuff. You want to see it. And also, there's a chance for you to get a special edition of our upcoming album, The Great War, if you go and join us on Patreon. So do that, and do that now! Bye-bye.
Okay, so Carolean's Prayer, Soldiers of the Swedish King, Sabaton History. That was another really, really great one. God, I enjoyed these so much. I could literally sit down and go through all of the songs and Sabaton histories in one go. Like, I love doing these. It is hard for me to hold off watching any of them until I get on here and log on and do the reactions to them. But that was another great one. As always, like, comment, subscribe. Help me keep building the channel. I appreciate all the support, all of the comments and insight and recommendations. I appreciate all of it. So yeah, it's been great, and keep it up, and I will see you all next time.